hear me okay? Yep. Cool. Welcome everyone to our first Brisbane property panel event that we're hosting. Thank you for attending tonight, and hope you all enjoy it and get some good information out of the night. My name's Scott Jennison, my wife Melinda. We own Streamline Property Buyers, and obviously we have our panel here, which I'll introduce shortly. Our guest speakers will just give you a bit of a briefing on what they're seeing in the property market, and then we'll throw some questions at them. Open up the questions for the crowd if anyone's got questions, which hopefully people have got some good ones ready for them all. And then we'll just ask questions and hopefully share some information for what we're seeing. MC for the night, Grant Doyle. Exec Force. Melinda Jennison, Streamline Property Buyers. Alistair MacMillan up the end from Wilston. Mark Trayner from STAC Capital. And Jonathan Bell from Bell Estate Agents. So I will hand over to Grant. Make sure you get some good questions in.
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, Grant Doyle is my name, as I said. I'll be your MC for the evening. Quick run sheet just to go on the back of this. We'll have two sets of kind of questions which will kind of, I guess, if you like, partition in between kind of two sets of themes, and then we'll have a break and we'll come back and open it up to the floor. I'd like to firstly thank Melinda and Scott for having the evening on. It's been great to be in the background and have this, and the great team from Streamline put this all together. So a bit of a round of applause for them too first. Hey? Cool. So I guess what we're here to do is talk around truth in property. Everyone's got a sort of, I guess, an impression of what that is. So we've put a panel together of subject matter expertise on what's going on from their perspective. So hopefully this evening is going to be informative. So that's stampeding straight into the first question of the evening. What's going on out there at the market? What are you seeing? What's sort of the trending? What's the narrative? What are people up to? So I'm going to kind of throw straight to our statistician Melinda on this one. So give us a bit of a rundown from a data perspective on what you're seeing.
Thanks, Grant, and look, thanks very much everybody for joining us here tonight. I know just in the introductions that I made in meeting some of you, a lot of people do tune into our podcast, Brisbane Property Podcast, so you may be familiar with my voice and you may be familiar with the fact that I am a data nerd, described by Scott. So what I will run through really quickly is what we're seeing in terms of data here in Brisbane. Assuming you're all interested in Brisbane property, that's why you're here. Now, when we look at the data up to the end of July, which is the most recent data that we have available, median values for all dwellings in Brisbane retracted 0.8%. When we break that down into the housing market and the unit market, we saw a retraction of negative 1.1% in the housing market, whereas in the unit market, we actually saw growth, positive growth. So we cannot rely on data to tell the full story. What we need to do is make sure we break down and understand that data. One more thing I will say, when we are talking about a median value, that's not the average sale price. A median value reflects the middle score of what is actually selling. And I think the theme that might come across tonight is that, not all properties are selling. Days on market are trending higher. The gap between buyers and sellers for some properties is widening, and therefore data tells a certain story about the properties that are selling, but it doesn't necessarily tell the story about what's happening across the board. You've got to overlay that data with on-the-ground knowledge based on what is making up that data and what properties are becoming part of that median data trend. So I hope that's given you a brief overview of what we're seeing in terms of the data.
Thanks, Melinda. I think one of the things that you're hearing a lot about at the moment is interest rates. What's it costing us to get money? What money is costing us to get money? So I'll probably throw to Mark from STAC Capital on that one, just to kind of ask, mate, what are you seeing? What's the narrative out there at the moment with regards to interest rate rises, finance, all that sort of situation?
More. So I guess it seems like everyone's in a bit of a panic, I guess, and the media's spinning that up. People are worrying that interest rates are going up, and the reality is that interest rates are going back up to a normal-ish level, and even when they go up to whatever the high level is, it's still probably going to be pretty low on an average long-term basis. Interest rates, I don't know. The norm used to be 6-7%. The norm's probably now going to be 4 to 5%. But can people afford it? Yes, they can. Even when so the APRA that sets the minimum interest rate that banks have to assess home lending borrowing capacity at, the lowest that got to was 5.25%. So even when rates get up to 4.5%, 5%, people can still afford it. It's just maybe not so much smashed avocado. Borrowing capacity is going down though, because the banks now have to assess 3% above what the current rate is. So that is creeping up more and more. So it's now getting into like the sixes that you're getting assessed at. So maybe if you could borrow $2 million 6 months ago, you might only be able to borrow, I don't know, I'm making a number up here, $1.5 million, just to make up a number. I haven't done the maths. But yeah, so it is changing a little bit. Rates probably will still go up a little bit more. I think most people who are in the finance and economics game are maybe people are thinking like me, that I think the Reserve Bank are a little bit asleep at the wheel. They're making decisions before they've really got the data about what's coming through. And there's going to be another rise early to mid next year that a lot of people don't realise about. Even if the Reserve Bank stops, all the banks got pretty much free money from the Reserve Bank. We're talking billions and billions and billions that the banks borrowed from the RBA at 0.1% for 3 years. So rolling off in March next year, the banks are going to have to start replacing that money with wholesale market money. So the banks will have to force rates up again outside of the Reserve Bank increases. So yeah, I think we've got more rises to come. I'm willing to put my money on rates coming back down at the end of next year, but that's just my bet.
Willing to guess what that is?
Forecasting's a mug's game, is what I've always said.
Yeah. What I might do is throw to Al. Kind of give us a bit of a heads up, mate, from what you're seeing out there from a real estate agent or a principal's perspective.
I think the market that we're in right now, I think, is probably better than what it was 8 weeks ago or 12 weeks ago. The last couple of months has been pretty tough in the sense that there was a federal election, and then buyers just got jammed up with rate rise after rate rise, and then the media didn't help us either. So a lot of negativity in the marketplace. Right now I think there's more confidence with buyers than there was probably 8 to 12 weeks ago, and we saw people, really open home numbers for us as a barometer of how the market's travelling, and so we went from 30, 40 groups per open to 3 or 4 per open. And those numbers have now sort of back to a normal level, and I think that's what's, there's been a lot of negativity around the market, but right now what I see is this is just a normal market. I think now agents, they've got to be able to communicate to owners where the market is, and we're finding that owners who want to do a deal and meet the market will transact. And owners that are still chasing, that absolute premium, and the market has come off a little bit, well, they're going to have to ride the cycle out and probably withdraw and look at it, when rates start to drop at the end of next year or after that. But overall, I think right now it's a solid market. It's a good market.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch, certainly from Streamline Properties' perspective, of any of their social medias, it's counting the shoes at the door as a gauge to how many people are actually going through. I want to throw, if I can, to Jonathan and talk around from the perspective of the rental market. You got any insights there for us, mate?
Yeah, it's been an incredible 18 months. We've seen vacancy rates drop from 4% to under 1% across Queensland. We've seen incredible numbers. One of our landlords is here, and we had 31 groups through their open and 25 applications over the weekend. So it is a rental crisis at the moment. And I think that back to interest rates, we're noticing that these owners are not seeing that pressure because they've had 15 to 20% increases on their return in percentage increase on their rents, and then now a 1% increase isn't actually impacting them, and their yields are still really strong.
Yeah. Do you see that changing? Do you see that sort of recalibrating itself, or is it they're going to stay where it's at?
I don't, because no one's building because building materials are so expensive. I don't see the supply increasing. I see the demand continuing to increase. So I think that yields will continue to get better, and I think a lot of landlords are going to benefit through this period.
Mark, are you seeing that from a long-term pipeline perspective for building with capital investment?
Yeah, definitely. The number of apartment developments in Brisbane over the last couple of years has been very, very low. If you compare the number of cranes in the city now compared to what it was a few years ago, it's just hardly anything going on. Townhouse projects even, there's not enough. We talked on your podcast the other week about the fact that just building townhouse projects in Brisbane City Council is hard work because the council requirements for car parking makes most townhouse projects unfeasible. So there's a real lack of supply coming on. I don't know, as far as supply and demand, it's completely outright. I mean, we need more investors at the end of the day. There's a rental crisis, you need more supply. It's really all that we've been seeing getting built in the Brisbane City Council. I shouldn't say all, but most of what we've been seeing is single housing developments. A lot of high-end stuff, but there's really not a lot of affordable townhouse or apartment stock getting delivered in Brisbane.
Which kind of leads me into a media question, and I think if anyone picks up the paper or opens up any type of algorithm at the moment, you'll be seeing most of it being a bad news story around the real estate market, especially in our backyard. I know that you were appearing in a Courier Mail article, last week?
Right.
So, I mean, I would like is to ask all four of you what you see as the media's impact on what your specific part of the real estate game is actually being impacted or not impacted, either that's positive or negative. When you want to have a crack at that?
Look, the media's definitely got the ability to shift buyer sentiment in a big way. They obviously, provide headlines that create clicks. We call it clickbait advertising, clickbait headlines, but ultimately there's a lot of fear mongering that we've seen across the last 2 or 3 months as interest rates have been increasing, and that does have an impact on buyer sentiment. And we talk to buyers every single day, so we get a good feel around what buyers are feeling and what their sentiment is like. And we've seen a shift because, our job consistently is to educate buyers on what the reality is and not necessarily what the Courier Mail headlines or any paper for that matter might be suggesting. And there's obviously a lot of forecasters. Banks do a lot of forecasting around price movements, which is interesting because banks are providing the funding around property transactions, but banks don't actually factor in the balance between supply and demand. And I think the big thing that Brisbane has in its favour in the current market conditions is that our supply, that is the number of listings, total listings available for sale is still trending about 25% below our long-term average. So what that means is, based on the number of buyers that are looking in the market, we still have tight supply. So even if those buyers are, sitting on the sidelines, if they are nervous, they, can't potentially borrow as much as they used to borrow, we've got to consider that the supply side is actually very low here, and that's very different to what's happening in both Sydney and Melbourne, the other 2 major capital cities on the East Coast, where supply in terms of total listing volumes is now well above the long-term trend again. So when you see any headlines, especially in papers like the Financial Review talking about the Australian property market is this, it is not relevant when they are not talking about the supply in specific markets. There is not one property market around Australia. There are several property markets around Australia, and even within Brisbane, there are multiple property markets, and we cannot assume that Brisbane data as a whole applies to every property market within our city. In fact, we just recorded an interview with Eliza Owen, Head of Research at CoreLogic Australia. That will be coming out this week on the Brisbane Property Podcast. And she confirmed for us that the Brisbane data that we see here and that is reported through the news incorporates more than 17,000 square kilometres of land. It is all of southeast Queensland sales, but for the Sunshine Coast, Noosa and the Gold Coast. So if we're looking at Brisbane data, I can guarantee you what is happening west of Ipswich is not what is happening 5 kilometres from the Brisbane CBD. So it's really important that people understand what that data is made up of.
Before you go, how do we then get the reality out of that? How do we get the real out of that?
Well, obviously breaking down the data into segments of the market makes sense, and when professionals know how to analyse and break down that data, and we pay for that data to be able to break that down. We're very fortunate to have a VA Pauline, who works for us in the Philippines, who every month breaks down that data to a suburb level, and then we can then group that data into different regional councils so we can understand what's happening in Ipswich, what's happening in Logan, what's happening in Redlands, what's happening in Moreton Bay, what's happening in Brisbane, and then we have the ability to break it down even further should we wish to do so. So data should not be analysed on a month-to-month basis. It's the trend that we're observing, and obviously, you know, everybody has access to data, but it takes a lot of analysis to break it down into all of those, you know, individual segments of the market.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, what are you seeing, mate, in the rental market?
I would say it was positive and negative. I think from a tenant point of view, it actually educated the tenants. I'd say 2 years ago, trying to get a $100 increase on rents was borderline impossible, and you get some abusive messages come back. And then 2 years now, people will see a 10% increase and just think that's normal. In saying that, what Melinda just said as well is that a townhouse or apartment in Spring Hill isn't the same as a house in Wilston. So landlords then they would see rental crisis headlines and then expect a 15 to 20% increase on their rents. You can't actually compare a house in Wilston to a unit in Spring Hill. I think throughout that COVID period, we saw a drop of rents about 20% because a lot of the short-term letting went to long-term letting. There was one night I went to bed and woke up and there was about 100 new listings online, and that's at the same time that there's houses in this area that are going up by 10%. So two completely different markets. I think people see it and you can't compare them.
Apples to apples.
Exactly.
I mean, if you pick up anything to do with media at the moment, there's people living in cars, right? There's a huge problem out there with not enough rental properties.
Yeah, there's a genuine rental crisis. Vacancy rates, I haven't seen one over 1%. Even in Spring Hill now, we've seen a 20% increase in the last few months. You can't get a 2-bed, 2-bath under $650 a week in the inner city ring.
And what was that before?
There was one, we did a 2-bed, 2-bath in COVID for $350.
That's amazing. Mark, number doctor perspective, what are you seeing? What's the media doing to your part of the game?
I think the media, I'm not seeing the media doing anything to our game, really. I mean, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of panic talk, but I'm not seeing any real problems, actually. And I think, to your point, Melinda, about locations, demographics, you know, and if I go back and look at the GFC, right, and you look at Sydney leading up to the GFC when interest rates were shooting up, Western Sydney values went crashing pretty early because wages relative to debt, properties, people was paying huge amounts of money, getting a huge amount of debt relative to their income. When interest rates went up, people were really sensitive to it in Western Sydney, so values dropped 30-40% in Western Sydney, but Eastern Sydney, completely different market, right? That crash, and it ended up having some pain because all the investment bankers lost their jobs, but that was a one-off. But
all living in Eastern Sydney.
Yeah, but the big thing here, as far as that goes, is, you know, I think if you're earning $25 an hour, life's bloody tough at the moment, right? Like grocery bills have gone up, rents are going up, fuel's going up, everything's going up. So if you're already on a pretty low wage, life is genuinely hard. But, you know, I mean, I guess when we talk about properties in this area, you're talking $1 million plus properties. As far as houses go, that's probably too cheap. Probably $1.5-2 million plus now. I mean, apartments are probably pretty close to $1 million. But people buying those properties, they're not on $25 an hour. And everyone that I'm talking to, and had conversations that we've had tonight about even just hiring receptionists or hiring junior staff. Every business I talk to in every industry, everyone's seeing wage pressure at like minimum 10%, 15-20% for people who are on reasonable incomes. You know, I mean, I've heard of plenty of cases of jobs that were $100,000 salaries 2 years ago are now $150,000, $180,000 salaries. So again, you know, and to go back to 4 or 5 years ago when property values in Brisbane were not moving while Sydney prices were going up, one of the big limiting factors was we didn't have jobs in Brisbane. So people couldn't move to Brisbane. Whereas now, everyone's moving here. We've got unemployment at 3-point-something%, which, as I said, I don't know whether I'll get in trouble for this, but even the dole bludgers are working. Everyone's got jobs. Everyone's got incomes. So as much as interest rates go up, people are earning more and more money. Their borrowing capacity is increasing. People are still moving to Queensland. So how does that equate to real panic. People can still afford it. We're not seeing anyone in trouble. But I don't know. If you asked a mortgage broker in Ipswich or in the outer areas of Logan, they might give you a different answer.
Yeah. I think it can tend to be the three things, right? What are you paying for at the grocery till? What are you putting in your car? And then whatever other living costs you've got on top of that, whether it's mortgage or rental. Al?
Oh, mate, the media, for a large degree, they're a massive pain in the arse, to be honest, to be frank. And yeah, we see huge impact. Like if there's a lot of negativity and someone comes out and says value's going to drop by 30%, you see a tangible impact at open homes that weekend. So yeah, it changes so dramatically from week to week. So you can literally have 35 groups of buyers through one Saturday, and then the very next Saturday you single digits, and it's off the back of nothing really has changed. Even interest rates, there might have been one, but it's more that sentiment and confidence or lack of confidence that buyers have. It was interesting because when COVID first came in and everyone sort of shit themselves to a degree, and you've got like I think it was the head of CBA came out and said that property values across Australia are going to drop by 30%. We couldn't do opens, we couldn't do on-site auctions, we couldn't do inspections. Like, it was a really confronting period of time for about 6 weeks, and then it just went gangbusters. Like, we were having one buyer through a house at a time due to COVID to get around and open. But I had this little house in Fifth Avenue. We had a line of 100 metres of individual inspections coming through, and so it just started this amazing run that certainly in my 20 odd years, I've never ever seen that happen in Brisbane, and to my knowledge, it never has happened. So we've just gone through the best market that's ever existed in the history of Brisbane, and then we get jammed up with a few rate rises, and yeah, the negativity coming out of the media is just insane. And when you sit down with an owner or a buyer, and owners are saying, "Oh, we've missed it," you go, "Okay, hang on. Let's just look at the numbers. 18 months ago, this was the value of your property. And today, or let's say if you sold in the height of the market, which for us was probably around September last year, August, September, October last year, that was probably the peak of the market. Then it started to come off a bit. When you break it down as a percentage, in terms of the amount of money that potentially they've just missed in that slight softening of the market, they're still up 25% in 18 months. So it just takes a little bit of time just to explain and articulate to an owner that you can still exit the market right now, even with the negativity that exists, and still you're up massively. We're up. They might be up a net $1 million in 12 months. And you go, well, how do you save $1 million in a year? You might be able to, but not many others.
And do you want to say something? You have something more to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to add off the back of Al's comment there, there's a lot of people that talk about trying to pick the top or the bottom of the market, and I find that a really interesting concept, because the only time that you know that a market has bottomed out or peaked is looking in the rearview mirror, because you have no idea when that is happening in real time, because the market is a very transient thing, and there's buyers and sellers transacting at all times in the market. We definitely see shifts on the ground by the number of groups coming through open homes, but as Al said, with that media messaging, that can have such an impact on that buyer sentiment week to week. And I'd argue, in fact, in the last couple of weeks, there's been an uptick in the number of buyers that have been out. Saturday, 2 weeks ago, it was a cold, wet Saturday. We were lining up with umbrellas to get through a couple of the properties that our team had inspected. Now, the media won't tell you that, because that's not going to get a click. The media is going to tell you that property values are falling $167,000, which was the headline attached to the Courier Mail article that I was quoted in. However, that's not the case, and again, it was reflective of median data that was being reported over a 3-month period at the beginning of the year versus the next 3-month period. And circling back to what I said right at the beginning of the night, median data is only as good as what it is actually made up of. So it's really important to understand information before you actually rely on that to make selling decisions or purchasing decisions.
Just one thing I just want to add to that. And the other thing which is somewhat frustrating is that by the time it comes out in the paper, it's past tense.
Yeah.
Like the data that they're reporting is a minimum generally of at least 90 days old, 3 months old. So, you know, when a property sells today, it's not going to settle for another 30 days if you're lucky. Generally, it's 45, 60. And then the titles office doesn't pick that information up for another month. So, you know, like all the data that's being reported is like past tense, and it's sometimes going to lack so much relevance to the current market that we're seeing.
Yeah, hold there, because I'm going to now segue that into a conversation around the future. I know predictions and all that sort of stuff, but what do you see? Like, if you looked into the crystal ball, what's the next 9, 12 months look like?
Well, mate, if the head of the CBA can't get it right, then I've got no chance. But I mean, I think right now, like I said before, I think it's a very normal market at the moment. I think we're fortunate. I don't really leave Windsor Wilston Grange, so. You know, I think around this area, it's historically in the 20 odd years I've been doing it, it's low stock levels, it's strong buyer demand. As you said, the people buying our houses are, you know, they've factored in potential rate rises that are coming. People with money have still got money. There's a little bit of concern there, and there's probably been a slight correction in pricing, but it's very marginal in comparison to what it has been. So I think now there's more confidence in the market than there was, you know, 3 months ago. But I think also you look at what is happening in Brisbane over the next 10 years, and there's a huge amount of optimism. You know, I think that the next 12 to 18 months might be, you know, if they keep pushing rates up, then yeah, it's going to affect some of the buyers. But I think long term, when you look at over the next 10 years, and you look at the infrastructure and the amount of money that's going to be pumping into this city, with still migration being strong, I think there's so much optimism to look forward to. And I think if you look at the median sale price in Brisbane in comparison to pretty much every other capital city in the country, we're still miles behind. Like Sydney, Melbourne prices, we've got so much opportunity to catch that up. So the notion that it's going to stagnate and retract, I think, is completely false. But having said that, I don't have any idea really.
So Mark, with a prediction of interest rates going up a bit further, what do you see that as a futuristic perspective looking like?
Well, again, you know, the Reserve Bank with all their bloody economists and quantitative analysts, and you know, they're spending probably hundreds of millions of dollars a year on wages for people to try to work it out, and they still don't have a bloody clue what's going to happen. So you know, that's why I always say forecasting's a mug's game. 9 out of 10 economists get it wrong. But look, I mean, Reserve Bank interest rates are still going to go up. At what point the Reserve Bank decides to stop putting them up, hopefully they can't be too far away. Like I said, there is going to be this term funding facility thing coming off from March onwards that will drive rates up a bit more. But I'm kind of getting the feeling on the ground that I think the numbers as far as the economy goes, what the Reserve Bank's looking at, I think they'll probably overshoot the mark. It's kind of my guess, but
do it a bracket effect. Go a bit further, bring it back.
Yeah. But I don't know. But then again, at the same time, that whole wages thing, you know, there's wages are shooting up, so people generally do have money. It's the question of, and this is the bit that I don't have the answer to, is that I think people in poorer areas are going to struggle. So you're going to see parts of Australia really struggling to pay the bills, and other parts, you know, I guess when we look in this areas like this, where you're in a ring and people are generally, you know, family incomes are probably $250,000 plus a year. I think that demographic are going to be having a pretty good life still, really.
Jonathan, future, what do you see?
I just, from Victorian and New South Wales investors, the yields in Queensland are incredible. So, like yields in New South Wales and Victoria are 2 to 3%. Here you can get up to 4 to 5%. I've noticed a shift towards townhouses and apartments in the last 3 months. The numbers for tenants going through those have gone up dramatically. There's been a shift from people who can't afford houses, who don't want to go further out of the city, are now moving into townhouse and apartment living. So I think over the next 12 months we'll continue to see the yields strengthen in those townhouse and apartment markets. And then executive rentals, I think there's a cap of about $2,000 a week in high-end homes. I think as money continues to come into Brisbane, I'm noticing that I'd say 18 months ago it was hard to get above $1,250 a week, and then it's gone to $1,500, and now we've got property in Hendra. We've got an application at $2,200, and there's still horses walking past. So you couldn't get those numbers in Ascot 3 years ago.
Close to the racetrack.
exactly.
How much investment money is coming from outside of Queensland, do you think, as a property owner into the rental market?
In regards to landlords buying it, a lot. The last 18 months, I think that I'm noticing the savvy investors now are buying. I'm seeing a lot of New South Wales and Victorian investors start to contact to see, and they'll call you and say, is there any desperate sellers at the moment? So I'm starting to notice that they're looking, and they all say the same thing. They can't believe the yields they'll get, and they're looking at that 4 to 5 bed house in a ring, 10 kilometres, up to $1,500 a week rental returns.
Melinda, future?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the psychology of buyers is something that a lot of people don't consider when they're looking to buy property, because when we look at the past, if we go back to the last 12 months, we were in a market that was escalating in value up to 3% per month at its peak back in November, December last year, and yet we had everybody jumping onto the bandwagon. Everyone wanted their piece of Brisbane, so there was so much FOMO and there was so much buyer interest. But the second that media messaging became negative, that buyer interest dropped off. In actual fact, the best time to buy property is when you don't have a lot of competition, because you can pick out the best properties and you have the opportunity to negotiate, because you don't have to compete under multiple offer or bid with multiple other registered bidders. So that's the first thing that I will say. I'm actually very optimistic for quality properties in the next 12 to 18 months. I don't think we're going to see any retraction, and in fact, we're still seeing as a team, quality properties are still competitively sought after. There's still multiple offers on many of the properties that our team have bid on just in the last number of weeks and months. B and C grade properties, those that are on main roads, those that need a lot of work, they are trending with days on market increasing. There's less buyer demand. It doesn't mean to say they won't sell, but we're seeing opportunity or further prices, softening in that space. Remember, property prices are always driven by that balance between supply and demand. So if you've got a property that doesn't have high demand, it's not going to attract a premium price. So I think the underlying message there is, regardless of market conditions, anybody, a home buyer or an investor, should be focusing on quality, because in any market, quality is competitively sought after, and I think that's something that people should take away from this evening.
Great. I just want to switch gears, I guess, and move us into a conversation around the winning of the Olympics and how that is going to affect the world that we kind of work in the real estate market. I emceed an event with Adrian Schimmer last year when this is all very new news. I just certainly didn't know that this is a sort of a 20-year redevelopment plan, and in fact, a lot of the stuff that will be happening 3 or 4 years out from the Olympics, when we get the migration of Olympic teams from other countries that will come in and spend money here up until that point, was something I didn't really know about. I thought, the Olympics last for 2 or 3 weeks, right? And then we pack up and we go home. So there's a whole completely other conversation that needs to probably happen around that. I'm going to open this up to the floor. What do you see in your world with regards to the Olympics? I know it's a little way out, but
I think you have to be really careful with oversupply. I know that the Hamilton precinct, they're developing a lot of units. You don't want to be the nicest unit, and then next door goes up and it's nicer, and then the one next to it, and then you've got the apartment that you can't rent. So I think that buying good quality stock is really important, and not getting caught up in buying in the big development scheme where you've got the 1 bed, 1 bath with a beautiful gym and rooftop pool, because the one next to it's going to be even nicer.
Yeah. Good point. Mark, what are you seeing? Is there any sort of conversations happening for you in that kind of over the horizon pipeline sort of thing?
To be honest, I can't say it actually comes up in conversation at all for us. I would probably agree with that when you see big projects going on, and as much as we make good money doing funding for big projects, would I recommend buying an apartment in a big project? No. As a buyer, the reality, when you own an apartment in a big project, you go and try to sell it, you're probably also going to be competing against 20 or 30 other people trying to sell at the same time, selling exactly the same thing. So I wouldn't be a fan of buying in these big projects that will ultimately get developed for the Olympics. But I don't know, in general, there'll be construction activity, but I don't think, frankly, I don't think Brisbane needs any more jobs. It doesn't need any more construction activity aside from needing more housing, but we don't need the jobs because we've already got a completely full job market, so it's not going to help our economy anymore, I don't think, not in the next couple of years.
I think the pleasing thing from anything that I've written and spoken about with regards to this is the long term. There's a planned post, which is probably one of the better things. I think if anyone's been to the Homebush Stadium complex in Sydney, which is deserted for 5 days of the week, and then the rest of it's kind of accommodation for students. I don't know if they've done that in an exceptionally good way. Al, thoughts?
Oh, mate, I actually don't know why it's going to be good or if it's going to be good, but everyone thinks it's going to be good. So as an agent, we just draw on that. Owners certainly have gravitated and held on to it and are already forecasting and added their increase in values today, which has been somewhat problematic. You do need to explain that the Olympics is still 10 years away. But certainly, look, I mean, from a buyer's perspective, we're certainly promoting it, we're talking it up, but I actually don't know why it's going to be good or if it's going to be good. But if everyone thinks it is, it is.
Spoken like a true agent. Melinda, would you like to finish us off on that subject?
And that's precisely why people need to be represented by a good buyer's agent so that they don't actually get confused by the messaging that they may receive by sales agents. Look, what I will say, I've spent a lot of time researching the impacts that the Olympic Games may have on Brisbane. I listened to a podcast this morning, the director of Urbis, who's involved in the overall planning of the Olympics, the overall vision. What's exciting about the Olympic Games for Brisbane is this: 57% of the major Olympic venues are going to be hosted or held, located within 5 kilometres of the Brisbane CBD. This is a very different Olympic Games to the majority of other modern Olympic Games that we have seen throughout history. Now, the fact that the Olympic venues are located so close to the CBD, this requires a complete rejuvenation of our inner city way of life. Those venues are proposed to be linked by pedestrian access, so no stopping at red lights, crossing roads, waiting for lights to change. So it's hard to imagine what our city is going to look like 10 years from now. What is exciting about the Olympic Games is the infrastructure development that is likely to come between now and then. What Brisbane looks like today is going to be quite different to what Brisbane is likely to look like 10 years from now and certainly into the future. We have to consider as property buyers how that's going to impact our way of life in some of these precincts. When we look at some of the Olympic Game venues, the precincts around each of those venues that is planned is already information that is available to people. So as a property buyer, if you're buying in a precinct, I know a lot of people talk about buying near the Gabba, that's the main stadium. I'm going to buy a unit in Wollongabba, that's going to go up in value. It's always about supply and demand when it comes to understanding property. To Jonathan's point, if you're buying that 1-bedroom property in a precinct that has 300 others and you go to sell at the same time as 20 others, then property buyers have a lot of choice. So it's always about understanding what is that precinct likely to be like in the future and what is the future supply pipeline likely to be. The difficulty right now is that Council have not updated a lot of their city plans to reflect the development around the Olympic Games. So there's a lot of unknowns, but as that information becomes available to us, that's where we can obviously shout that information out to you. If you are a podcast subscriber, you'll get that information.
Lovely. What I want to do now, we're going to go to a break very shortly for 15 to 20 minutes, is parting comment. You're a buyer or a seller, pick a side. What do I do? Do I sell or buy now, or do I wait?
I think there's a lot of opportunity in the current market when there's a motivated vendor. I think that in the last few months we've seen some vendors that have committed to a purchase elsewhere, but as a result have had to sell. So they've had to meet the market, and that's been through a period where there's been a lot of uncertainty from buyers and a lot of buyers who were scared and not prepared to push. So understanding a vendor's motivation can help you understand whether there's opportunity in the market. There may still be some more opportunities as this market continues to transition into the future, but at the end of the day, quality properties are still highly competitive, so it's important to get a feel on the ground for how many people are turning up to that inspection, because that generally translates into the number of registered bidders or the number of people putting forward offers. If you're turning up and you're only one or two, other groups alongside you, that's low demand. But if you're turning up and you're lining up to get through that property, and then you're bumping into people walking through the hallways, that's a high demand property that's likely to attract a higher price. So it's very property specific.
I think for the right stock I would buy. For Al's sake I'd sell. But no, I think it's all about the yield, I think. So I'm noticing if you've got good quality stock, with the new minimum housing standards coming in, I think you need to be careful about buying something that you need to renovate or you don't want to renovate or want to knock down in 12 months. I think they're going to struggle. Yep. So as long as it ticks all the boxes from a rentability point of view, I'd be buying.
Perfect. Mark?
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. Everyone that I know who is in the industry, I'm not seeing anyone sell. I'm not seeing anyone worried that should I need to get out now before values drop. This bloke's building a new house, so he's obviously confident enough. Rental, if you're talking about investment, as long as there's a rental crisis, rents have got to keep going up, right? Interest rates are going to go up, but rents are going up, and they're going up pretty quickly, and interstate migration's still happening, jobs, still a job shortage, people still want to move to Queensland, so it's just going to make the problem even worse, which owning property is a good thing.
I think you should do both. I think you should get the splinters out of the bottom and get involved, because I think there's some really good opportunities that exist, and I think now's a great time to buy. I think for people wanting to sell, like I said earlier, there's an opportunity to still. A lot of the people we sell for have owned their homes for 20 years, 15 years, so it's like such a marginal difference in what it was 6 or 8 months ago. I think that if I was looking at selling in the current market, I would definitely be doing a lot more due diligence on who I'm going to appoint to sell it. Respectfully to other agents, we've had to do not a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. And certainly what we're finding is that there's a whole new skill set that in order to transact, in order to actually do our job and get buyers to commit to properties and negotiate hard the best price and be able to articulate to an owner where they need to be, I think is it's a skill set that hasn't existed in our industry for the last 3 years at least.
Yeah, great point. Good point to close on. Yeah, we're going to now open to the floor for question time. Hopefully you've had a bit of a chance to compile your thoughts and ask the subject matter expert panel on anything that you want in regards to real estate or the things that we've covered. Something else that you're not sure of, obviously, you can cover that as well. Anyone out there want to ask a question first? Yeah. Okay, there you go.
All of you sort of spoke about normal and things are going back to normal, or there's an adjustment to normal. Has normal shifted since COVID and the increase? Like, is there still a normal market? Does everyone know what the new normal is, or is it forever changing?
Geez, that's a good question. I don't know. In my period of time, a normal market for me in this marketplace is, days on market being, around 30, average number of bidders being between 4 and 6, tight stock, transactions in Wilston sitting, 50 a year, and strong buyer demand. The last 18 months, 24 months is the exact opposite of normal. Like, it was just insane, like unbelievable. And I think it's just, there was that period of time, just as the market started to turn a little bit when interest rates went up, and it was a couple of days I remember being at home, and it was a little confronting because we, halfway through the month I walk in the office and we'd normally have about $15, $20 million on the board. I walk in 15th of the month, we've got $2 million on the board in sales, which is a little confronting. It's just down a tad. And I remember going home and my wife goes, "Are you all right?" And I went, yeah, we're just about to start building a house, and we've got $2 million on the board. This is really, really good. And it took me a couple of days just to get my head right and get over it. And she said, well, and I said, you know what it's like? Here's how good it was. It's like you're a heroin addict, right? And for 2 years, you've just been, you know, having the best time of your life, and then you go on a sudden withdrawal overnight. And I think that just that period of time for a few weeks, because the market has been so ridiculously strong, it's just come off and it's probably had a bigger impact than most. But that, to me, that's a normal market that we're in at the moment in terms of those open home numbers and bidders and things like that.
Anyone else want to correct that? No?
I'll answer. Thanks for the. This is Anthony from our company, by the way. So just a disclaimer there. I mean, yeah, normal. Everyone, again, there's shock about interest rates, where interest rates are going to go to, but even where they're going to, it's still way below what used to be normal. I mean, an interest rate, a home loan at 4 point something %, it's still bloody cheap. I mean, the flip side of that is that people have paid more for houses than what they would have paid 5 years ago, but still, even long-term averages, and when you start comparing income versus debt cost repayments, it's still pretty good. And just as you said, I mean, reality is everyone's been having a huge bloody party for the last couple of years. You know, having a home loan at 2.5% is so far out of normal. It's not funny, right? And this is why we have inflation now. There's a whole bunch of factors, but the reality is there's a huge amount of money washing around the economy, and the fundamental point of lifting interest rates or dropping them back down is to try to control the economy. And there's way too much money flowing around in the economy. Everyone's having a great bloody lifestyle. It's, you know, had a conversation with a few people, particularly people older than me. You know, I talk about when I was a kid that, you know, you didn't go to cafes and restaurants 4 times a week, and you didn't go on overseas holidays every year or every 2 years. And, you know, I mean, my parents never owned a brand new car when I was growing up. It's just, lifestyles these days are bloody good. And so, you know, if we go back to a normal, you know, even if that was 5%, life's still pretty good, really.
Any more?
Yeah, since last year, end of last year, we realized when I went to every auction, always a guy over the phone win the bidding. Then asking all the agents, I said, what's happening? Or, interstate from New South Wales or Victoria. My question is those people still there? Are they still bringing inquiry from Victoria or New South Wales? And for our local buyers here, is there any opportunity how to, you know, compete with those guys, you know?
Who wants to have a crack at that one?
The last quarter of last year was unbelievable in terms of interstate inquiry. Not so much people migrating, but interstate investors purchasing. You might have seen that a bit, Johnny. But so 50 in our office, 50% of our transactions per month were done to interstate purchases, which is insane. That came to a complete grinding halt this year. So it literally just, we had some migration and expats coming into Brisbane through COVID, but then the last quarter of last year was all investor based. Now we would sell probably 35 houses a month, maybe one would be sold to an interstate investor or an interstate person. So it's completely changed on a dime. That's our experience.
Jonathan, you've already said something about that. Yeah. Do you want to back that up?
Yeah, I think that it's the investors that I'm noticing interstate have already owned multiple properties in Queensland and they're buying again. The new investors, I used to get calls all the time from interstate investors who are looking at rental appraisals and wanting more feedback, but that has dried up. But I'm noticing that multiple owners are still active.
Melinda, your auctions every weekend?
Yeah, we're at the forefront of buyer inquiry, so we see it through the number of people that inquire to buy. What I will say is that the volume of interstate investors has decreased, but the quality of interstate investors has increased. And what I mean by that is that the investment inquiry that we've seen just in the last 3 or 4 months through the worst of the crisis, if you wanted to call it that, has been high value interstate investors with a price point generally above that $1 million price point. So these are not your entry-level first-time property investors. These are sophisticated investors that are reading the market, that see this transition period as a buy opportunity. They're not looking for a quick purchase, they're looking for a quality purchase. So that's something that's coming through in our inquiry, and any properties then that we are putting through to the rental market. Quality properties are getting multiple applications, sometimes sight unseen before they're even settling. So, again, it's about quality over quantity, and that's reflecting through in that interstate inquiry that we're starting to see. Thanks for your question.
Hi, Jonathan. I have a question for you. So you've been talking about the rental yields, that they're going up. So what factors, other than migration, are leading this trend upwards?
Yeah, so divorces were actually significant in COVID. So families need two dwellings. So what I was finding is one would stay in the family home and then one would have to rent. The other one is building. Because building has been delayed, a lot of people have to rent. So they're renting for 12 months, 18 months while they're building a house. And then also, expats and then interstate coming here. So it was migration internationally, migration from interstate, people building, and then also the floods as well. There was people throughout that period where there was significant flooding, there was less houses available. So there was 4 or 5 key reasons.
So just to add on to that one, so would that affect the entire Brisbane market, like entire SEQ region? Like the rental yields are going up because of the same trend, and also like you were also talking about future migration, so even the international migration is taking that hit. So Australia is opening borders to other countries, so would we see that trend going up again?
Yeah, each market's different. Kelvin Grove, for example, hasn't really seen increases until now because that's very dominated by the university there. So it really depends on who the tenant demographic is for that area. There was a property in Coomera, Pimpama. We got $800 a week for a 4-bed, 2-bath in that location. I would say 3 years ago that was probably worth $400 a week. And then there's properties, Marsden, for example, we're getting $600 to $700 in Marsden because of the school there. So it's quite, it really depends on what the factors of why tenants are actually wanting to be there. So I think it really depends. Each market is very different and it's very temperamental to why they're moving there.
Hi guys. A question more for Mark. So from the RBA, the inflation and the renting and getting the loan, as of right now, with potential increase for RBA and stuff, would you lock in a fixed term for 1 or 2 years, or would you go full variable thinking that it's going to come down like the next 18 months?
If you compare, I might have to ask you guys for the actual rates right now, but the difference between variable and fixed now is so wide that you're going to pay a massive premium for a fixed rate versus, your variable will probably go up, but when you have this much of a gap, even if variable rates go up by a fair amount, you're probably not going to catch up. And at best you might break even, but you'll probably be behind. There's no way to know for sure, but when you've got a big gap, I mean, a lot of people were fixing during COVID when fixed rates were ultra cheap, and you were paying about the same for a fixed rate as a variable, or maybe a tiny bit more. But now when you've got a massive gap, what is the gap now between a 3-year and a variable? 1.5%. Yeah. Hard to do without using a spreadsheet. But I mean, if you're paying a 1.5% premium today, you're paying that right now, that premium right now. By the time that you factor in, if you did it for 3 years, how much the variable rates have to increase to even make up what you've been overpaying from day one, it starts becoming, rates have to move a hell of a lot to catch up.
It's very dumb, but if the RBA decide in the next 3 months to increase 0.5, that's your 1.5 difference right there already in 3 months.
Yeah. It's true. It's honestly, again, and that's why I say forecasting's a mug's game. I mean, I'm personally choosing to keep my debt variable. I wouldn't bother fixing. But fixing tends to be, other than where we had this super low fixed rates versus variable during this COVID period, fixed rates tends to be more of an emotional comfort thing. Some people just fix their rates because it just allows them to sleep better at night, because at least I know my rate isn't going to go up. I know what my repayment's going to be for the next 3 years, and that helps me sleep better at night. If that is important to you, then you should do it. I mean, what a lot of people do as well is just a bit of fixed and a bit of variable. So I've got half my mortgage locked in, so I'm comfortable enough. So if half of my mortgage moves up, I'm okay with that. But it really is an emotional thing. Trying to work out, will I be ahead or will I be behind? You know, go to the horse track and put your money on, and you'll probably do better.
All on black.
Yeah.
We have another question. Someone in the middle here.
Jonathan, this is you. With such tight rental vacancy, where do you see the demand for a new, like, inner ring unit or the outer ring, suburbs, for new supply, like new vacancy, new people?
Vacancy rates, I think that they'll stay really tight until there's more supply. I think when the development's further out, North Lakes, Caboolture, Burpengary that way, and then towards Ipswich, until the building crisis eases a little bit and people can build new investment stock, I think vacancy rates will be really tight.
And that's coming from new stock in those areas?
Until there is new stock. There is no new stock because people aren't building. So until that time, I think vacancy rates will be, but I think when building gets easier, then I think supply will go up, there'll be a little bit more vacancy. Regarding around the inner city ring, I think vacancy rates will stay around 1%.
Much more likely up there.
Yeah.
I'm just asking the question. So it's probably much more likely that vacancy rates will shoot up faster in the outer areas where supply can come on, a lot more supply can come on, versus inner.
Yeah, I think, as Melinda always said, supply and demand. I think it's when supply increases, then we're going to see vacancy rates go up, but there is no real opportunity for supply to increase in these inner city areas unless they're townhouse or apartments.
Quick one for Mark. Appetite for development funding. What are the lenders, private lenders, thinking at the moment?
A little bit of a mixed bag, actually. So, there's a lot of development financiers, and we deal with banks and a hell of a lot of private lenders. And when I say a hell of a lot, it's in triple digits. How many private lenders we deal with that are in the development space? It is a mixed bag. There's some who are getting a little bit nervous, and maybe what was 70, 75 LVR is now 65, 70. So maybe pulling back 5 to 10% on LVR, maybe being a little bit more discerning about what projects they'll finance. But at the same time, there's plenty of financiers who are just gung-ho, keep going hard, no change to what they were doing 6 months ago. So it is a mixed bag. I think it's still going to remain a very strong market, because a lot of the private finance market, and I should say too that the private finance market now is very different to what it was even 5 years ago. There's a hell of a lot of players have come into the private finance market in development finance, and a lot of the money actually comes from there's investors, their mums and dads who have put money into a fund manager because money sitting in a term deposit's been earning nothing, so better to put it in with a fund manager that pays a 5% rate, something like that. But a lot of the big super funds, a lot of the institutional super funds that you put your money with, Sun Super or with whoever you put your money with, they've got $1 billion sitting there that you've ticked whatever boxes, and that box that you've ticked for your risk level is appropriate for this category of risk of debt in development finance. So they go to a fund manager and say, here, you can have 100 mil, you have 100 mil, you have 100 mil, I need to get all this money out the door. That is not changing. There's still a massive push, and when you've got equity markets, stock markets taking a little bit of a hit, and investment managers say, maybe you don't want to have so much in the stock market. You've got commercial property market is going to have a little bit of a hiccup probably, so they're not putting more money into that. So then where do we put this money? Well, debt is still a pretty good place to put your money when you're managing billions of dollars. So there's still a massive amount of money, and we still every month, at least every month, we have at least one new fund manager come to us say, hey, we've just started doing development finance, can you help us get some money out the door? So that's not changing. So yeah, I think the market's going to stay strong for that.
Hi, I'm just wondering what the individual panel members' view, if they have one, of buying off the plan in the CBD, 7-10 kilometres from the CBD in the next 12 months.
Through conversations that we have had with, developers developing, we did a podcast with Mark a few weeks ago and we talked exactly about this. The big risk is that a lot of those off-the-plan contracts are having to be torn up because developers can no longer honour the price that was agreed because of the escalating construction costs. So a lot of developers need to sell a certain proportion off the plan to actually initiate the development funding. So you may actually have the opportunity to enter a contract, but after 6 months of advertising and promoting and obtaining 30% pre-sales, the developer then might find themselves in a position that they can no longer build for the price that they'd originally estimated. So those contracts get torn up and the project doesn't continue. So that's a big risk to signing a contract that is off the plan at this point in time.
I think that tenants will always pay a premium for new stock. So when you're renting that property, if you're buying it as an investment property and you're renting it out for say $600 a week, even if the market moves 10%, that property is depreciating. So you don't usually see the rental increases over that period of time and I don't think the tenants look after it as an owner-occupier would in those regions, depending on the quality of the home. So I think the depreciation, you need to look at how much that rental increase and what the depreciation will be and how much you're spending on keeping it looking new.
I would say it's largely about product quality and location, and as well as who's the developer and what's their track record. If you're buying, I made the comment before about I wouldn't buy an apartment in a complex of 300 apartments where the apartment that you're buying is just the same as another 150 apartments in that building, and if you ever go to sell it or when you're trying to rent it, it's just exactly the same as everyone else's, it's just on a different floor. But smaller projects that are good quality, great location, at the end of the day, if people want to buy it to live in or if people want to rent it, and you're paying a good price for it, because there's some developers who, some will, if something's worth $500,000, they'll try and sell it to you for $550,000, and others will just sell it for what it's genuinely worth. So as long as you're paying the right price for a good quality product in the right location, then I think it's okay. I think it's good.
I think if I'm selling it, you should. But we don't sell. I think there's some great opportunities for off-market. We don't deal in large-scale units or large-scale developments, but I'm conscious we've got Activates Construction here in Happy House who, you guys have had some fantastic results off the plan. So there's obviously some clear advantages in potentially selling off the plan and not waiting, and we're still seeing that the premium is being paid for a really good high-end turnkey product. That has not we've not seen any correction in that price. So the opportunity to get that off the plan and still have some customisation there, I think there's some huge advantages.
Make sure you're not cash flowing someone's business. We have two more questions, I think. One more. Yep.
Thank you. Interested in your thoughts about how you see developments in the area, for example, at Burpengary and Caboolture that you mentioned, Jonathan, and how you feel that a buy and hold of a large lot now with the hope that for future growth. Whether you think that's a good strategy?
It's an interesting question because it's a question we get quite often. Should I buy a big block of land and hope that one day it might be rezoned and then I can make money? That's not an investment strategy, in my opinion. That's just a hope and pray strategy, because there's no guarantee with councils that land will be rezoned. It is very different if the land already has the capacity to be rezoned, and I think that you will therefore pay a premium upon entry if that is the case. So I think it really depends on what it is that you're looking to buy. I know is it west of Morayfield, Burpengary, there's a huge land subdivision project that's recently been announced. From an investment perspective, what that does, it's a huge increase in the supply of properties in that area. So, all of a sudden the existing properties that are nearby lose value because people will pay something similar for a brand new opportunity. So it's always understanding the balance between supply and demand in a location. But I think taking that approach of buy the large parcel of land and hope that one day it may be rezoned, there's a lot of risk that comes with that, because that day may never come. But if it's already zoned for subdivision, then depending on the gentrification of that region, that may or may not be a good strategy. And it depends on you as an investor in terms of what outcomes you're trying to achieve, because it could be lazy money while you're waiting 20 or 25 years for that area to become feasible for redevelopment. In the meantime, that money could have been better invested elsewhere. So it's very specific to your individual goals as to whether that would be something that I would recommend.
Yeah, I've got a view on that. When you're in areas like that, you're talking about land subdivisions. There's mistakes I've seen a lot of inexperienced developers make is all about services. So I've seen people go and get a DA for a land subdivision out in the suburbs. Go and get the approval. Great, let's start getting all the quotes in, and then, oh shit, it's going to cost $3 million to drag the sewer up from 2 kilometres down the road. So all of a sudden the project makes absolutely no sense, and your development site's not really worth anything, because it can't be developed until the next 5 people that are closer to the sewer can actually, until they develop theirs. So that's a big factor, is that you've got to understand whether a property like that can actually be developed. Is it going to be developable in the next couple of years, or is it 20 years away? And then the other thing probably is that in areas like that, it's massive swings. When the market's hot and a lot of land is selling, which like we just went through, then development site values will spike up massively. But when the market slows down, those big land subdivisions tend to pretty much grind to a halt, and nothing happens, and so the development site values can fall down a hell of a lot. So, yeah.
We have one last question, James.
I'm not sure who this is going to be for, Al, maybe Mark, but Brisbane premium inner ring fringe suburbs, if the market shrinks from lower values, do the difference between C grade stock and A plus, will that just continue to widen? And like, how much hurt will the rich people that have got still lots of money, how much hurt until they have to start fire selling and the like A premium stuff starts slipping as well?
I've always said if you don't know, you just make it up. But no, look, I'm not sure. Like, I know Melinda made a comment before in terms of, traffic is an indicator of premium property. I think price underpins premium. Like if you've got a property that's priced right, it doesn't matter where it is. If it's on a main road, if it's priced right and you buy well, I still think there's wonderful opportunities. In my experience, and I don't have the data to back it, but generally what I see is that when the market increases 10%, you tend to find that all those properties increase 10%. If it's a house on Kedgerbrook Road, it still increases. But there's already, like, even premium properties, there's still got good opportunities that exist. So I'm not sure if the gap is going to get wider. I think that in 10 years from now, that house on Kedgerbrook Road opposite us as a percentage will probably will go up a similar value to the percentage on Dalrymple Street. The overall gap's still going to be quite substantial, but I still think that there's still good growth if you can buy right.
probably don't want to hear the answer to my answer. I've heard a lot of chatter lately about the fact that high-end property will keep going strong because rich people have got lots of money and nothing will change. Unfortunately, history doesn't really tell the same story. When economies slow down, tends to be the ultra premium that hurts the most. So when times are good, rich people have got more money and they go and spend more money, and the values of those properties surge a lot. I mean, if you go back to the GFC, from memory, I think it was about 3 years that not a single property sold for over $5 million in Brisbane. Can't remember exactly where, I just remember it was about that number because people just didn't have money at the end of the day. You know, if you lost a couple of $1 million in the stock market and you're not earning $3 million a year anymore, you're only earning $1.5 million because your bonuses, you work for a public company or your business isn't making as much money, you're not going to run out and buy a $5-10 million house. So, I think when things slow down, that ultra premium end will hurt a little bit more. But in a ring, I mean, you'll answer this better than me, but I mean, I would think that, it's not affordable, but the middle, people earning family incomes of $200,000-$400,000 is probably pretty common in these middle inner ring areas. As long as unemployment stays low, then I think that not ultra premium but not affordable either should hold pretty strong.
Yeah, just one other thing. The notion that these guys are going to be forced to sell, I think, is unrealistic in our marketplace. Like, the people who I sell for have owned the house for 10 years or 15 years. Most of the people that we deal with in that higher end, they're professionals, they've got good income. If interest rates kept going, there's no alarm bells. They don't sell. Generally, the only reason that they're selling is downsizing is a massive component. Or, like Johnny said, COVID's been quite rife with divorce, which is a motivating factor to sell. But generally, that's it. They don't just wake up one day and, alarm bells are ringing and now I've got a fire sale. Like that, in our experience, it doesn't exist in our marketplace.
And even, we'll just keep going on. Even when you look at the GFC in Brisbane, the GFC, which, Australia didn't have it that bad compared to overseas, but compared to Sydney, I mean, from memory, I think we only dropped 5, maybe 10% over a period of 3 or 4 years. And again, what our values are versus Sydney and Melbourne gives us protection. Sydney and Melbourne, they do cop it harder because people are really up to the neck in debt. People in Brisbane generally aren't up to their neck. We don't see people, our clients who are borrowers, we don't see people like literally up to their neck, and we're not getting panic phone calls with people saying, shit, I can't afford my repayments anymore. It's people just aren't under that pressure.
And one thing I'll just add to that also, if you are looking to buy from an investment perspective and you are buying on a main road and you're buying those properties that you consider sort of entry level for a suburb, you've then got to consider desirability from a rental perspective, because that can impact on your yields. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered in terms of what and where you buy. So that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Is that a big, Scott? Look, from an investor point of view, I wonder if I could ask the panel members about holding costs. What's been happening with holding costs in the last few months, and what's likely to happen to investors in terms of holding costs, because there are multiple inputs to holding costs. I wonder what's going to happen to them in the next, say, 12 months.
Great question. Thanks for asking this question, John, because one of the biggest things that investors need to be aware of are the proposed changes to Queensland land tax legislation. So that can have a huge impact on an investor's holding costs for any investor that's holding land assets outside of Queensland that are accessible for land tax purposes. The liability is going to be calculated on the entire Australian land holdings from the 1st of July 2023 as proposed. So that is definitely something that is going to significantly increase the holding cost for some investors who have built out a portfolio across multiple states within the same entity. What I mean by that is the same company or under their own personal name. What that might result in is an exodus from, their Queensland land holdings, and we might further inhibit or reduce the amount of rental supply. There's going to be inflationary pressure on other holding costs as well that investors need to account for. Insurance, for example, so important to understand what the increase in insurance premiums is likely to be off the back of the most recent flood event. Any investors who are holding properties that have been impacted or close to flood overlays can see significant increases in those holding costs as well. So, across the board, that inflationary pressure may put increased interest rates as well. But as Jonathan's pointed out, the good news is that there's been very strong upward pressure on rents as well, and a lot of that increase in the rental amount per week should offset those costs. So the biggest one is the land tax, but I'd definitely be keeping an eye on insurance as well if you are in a location that is close to flood zones.
It's been the biggest challenge in my business is the building crisis and the cost of trades. And it's been the biggest frustration from our landlords. It's hard to get free quotes now. My electrician said he's increased his prices by $10 to $15 an hour on labour alone. Handymen are charging about $120 an hour. So there definitely is upward pressure, but I think the silver lining is that we've seen a 20% increase on rental yields over the last 12 months. So if you factor it all in, I think yields are still really strong. But yeah, it definitely is an upward pressure at the moment.
Insurance is a good one. I just copped that actually. It's a good point that I didn't realise until recently when I just finished building my new house, which is at absolutely zero risk of flooding, but because it sits in front of a creek, the insurance companies just go, that area is this risk level of flood. They don't care that my house, the Brisbane River would have needed to go up another 3 metres before I got to my house. No, you're in that area, so my premium's a lot more than what I thought it should have been. But input costs going up, holding costs going up, maybe, but the world has economics, the world has a way of finding equilibrium. If investors don't buy because holding costs are going up, then that's less rental properties available on the market, so rents go up, so yields go up, and so then it does make sense to buy investment properties. So, it all always has a way of balancing out. Maybe not in the next 2 months, but long term it does.
I've got nothing bad there.
Team, we'll probably cut it there. What I'd love is for you all to put your hands together and thank Al, Mark, Jonathan, and I'll hand back now to Scott. Thank you very much. It's a great being with you this evening. Again, stick around and network.